Sarah Martinez never imagined that a casual comment about her birthday would lead to the most unexpected turn of her career. At 28, she had grown used to being the youngest person in every boardroom, every executive meeting, and every high-stakes negotiation. What she didn't expect was how one moment of workplace mockery would reveal a truth that would shake the very foundations of the corporate world she thought she knew. In a world where experience is measured in decades, and respect is earned through gray hair and wrinkled suits, Sarah's story challenges everything we think we know about age, wisdom, and the power of underestimation. This is the true account of how a young woman's journey from office ridicule to unexpected revelation proves that sometimes the most profound changes come from the most unlikely sources. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning coffee break would become the catalyst for a story that no one saw coming, least of all Sarah herself. Sarah Martinez adjusted her blazer for the third time as she walked through the marble lobby of Pinnacle Industries. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. At 28, she had learned to dress older than her years, choosing conservative suits and neutral colors that she hoped would help her blend in with the seasoned executives who populated the 42nd floor. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Sarah clutched her leather portfolio, reviewing her notes for the quarterly review meeting. As the youngest regional manager in the company's history, she knew every presentation, every decision, and every word would be scrutinized. The pressure was constant, like a weight she carried everywhere she went. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah stepped into the executive suite where the morning buzz of activity was already in full swing. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the subtle scent of expensive cologne and perfume that seemed to permanently linger in the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and original artwork adorned the walls. Everything about this floor screamed power and authority. "Morning," Sarah called out Jennifer Walsh, the vice president of marketing, as she passed by with a steaming cup of coffee. Jennifer was in her 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from 30 years in corporate America. She had always been cordial to Sarah, but there was something in her tone that suggested she still saw her as the young upstart who had somehow stumbled into a position meant for someone with more experience. Sarah nodded and smiled. "Good morning, Jennifer. Ready for today's meeting?" "Oh, you know how these things go," Jennifer replied with a slight laugh. "Same old presentations, same old numbers. Though I suppose you might bring a fresh perspective." The way she emphasized fresh made it clear she meant young and inexperienced. The coffee station in the break room was Sarah's first stop, as it was every morning. She needed the caffeine to fuel her through what promised to be another challenging day. The break room was elegantly appointed with granite countertops, a professional-grade espresso machine, and a view of the city skyline that never failed to remind everyone of how high they had climbed in their careers. As Sarah prepared her coffee, she could hear voices from the small seating area in the corner. She recognized the voices immediately. Marcus Chun from finance, David Rodriguez from operations, and Lisa Thompson from human resources. They were some of the mid-level executives who had been with the company for over a decade each. "Did you see the proposal Sarah submitted last week?" Marcus was saying. His voice carried that particular tone people used when they thought they were being discreet, but actually wanted to be overheard. Sarah's hand froze as she reached for the sugar. She knew she shouldn't listen, but something about the way he said her name made her stomach clench. "The one about restructuring the client onboarding process?" Lisa replied. "I have to admit, it was pretty comprehensive." "Comprehensive, yes," David chimed in, "but you have to wonder if she really understands the long-term implications. I mean, she's barely been out of college for what, 5 years?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn. She had actually been out of college for 6 years, and she had worked her way up from an entry-level position through 3 promotions. But she knew that corrections wouldn't matter to people who had already made up their minds about her capabilities. "You know," Marcus continued, lowering his voice slightly, "I heard through the grapevine that she's turning 29 next month." Can you imagine? We're taking strategic direction from someone who was probably still watching cartoons when we were closing our first major deals. The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug louder than she intended. 29, Lisa repeated with amusement. I remember when I was 29. I thought I knew everything. Looking back, I realized I didn't know anything at all. The confidence of youth, David added philosophically. Remember when we all thought we were going to change the world? Now we just hope to make it through the quarterly reports without any major disasters. Sarah wanted to walk away, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. She had heard whispered comments before, casual remarks about her age and experience level, but never anything this direct. The casual cruelty of it struck her harder than she expected. I give her credit for ambition, Marcus said, his voice taking on a slightly more charitable tone. But ambition without wisdom can be dangerous, especially when you're making decisions that affect hundreds of employees and millions in revenue. True, Lisa agreed, though I have to say, her performance metrics are impressive. Her team consistently meets their targets, and client satisfaction scores are actually up in her region. Numbers can be deceiving, David countered. It's easy to look good when you're riding the wave of strategies put in place by your predecessors. The real test comes when you have to navigate a crisis or make tough calls that affect people's livelihoods. Sarah finally forced herself to move, walking slowly toward the exit. But as she reached the doorway, she heard Marcus say something that made her pause. Besides, we all know how she really got that promotion. Right place, right time, and probably a little help from the fact that the company was trying to look more diverse and forward-thinking. Youth has its advantages in today's corporate climate. The implication hit Sarah like a slap. They weren't just questioning her experience. They were questioning whether she deserved her position at all. The suggestion that her promotion was based on anything other than merit felt like a betrayal of all the late nights, weekend work sessions, and sacrificial personal time she had invested in her career. She walked back to her office in a daze, their words echoing in her mind. Her office was smaller than those of the senior executives, but it had a window and enough space for a desk, 2 chairs, and a small bookshelf filled with business strategy books and industry publications. She had worked hard for this space, this title, this opportunity to make a real difference. Sarah sank into her chair and stared out the window at the bustling city below. People hurried along the sidewalks, each pursuing their own goals and dreams. She wondered how many of them faced the same challenges she did, how many had to prove themselves over and over again because of something as arbitrary as their age. Her computer chimed with a new email notification. It was from Robert Sterling, the CEO, asking all department heads to gather in conference room A at 10 o'clock for an important announcement. Sarah glanced at her watch. She had 30 minutes to compose herself and prepare for whatever was coming. As she reviewed her notes for the quarterly review one more time, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't let their comments discourage her or make her second-guess her abilities. She had earned her position through hard work, innovative thinking, and results. If they wanted to judge her based on her age, that was their limitation, not hers. The conference room was already filling up when Sarah arrived 5 minutes early. She chose a seat near the middle of the long mahogany table, close enough to demonstrate engagement, but not so close as to appear presumptuous. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as executives filed in, their voices mixing into a low hum of speculation about the meeting's purpose. Marcus, David, and Lisa entered together, still chatting quietly among themselves. When Marcus caught sight of Sarah, he nodded politely, his expression giving no indication of the conversation she had overheard earlier. The casual nature of his greeting somehow made their earlier comments sting even more. Jennifer Walsh took her usual seat near the head of the table, checking her phone one last time before the meeting began. Her silver hair caught the light from the overhead fixtures, and Sarah couldn't help but think about the decades of experience that hair represented. She touched her own dark brown hair self-consciously, wondering if she would ever command that kind of automatic respect. At exactly 10 o'clock, the conference room door opened, and Robert Sterling entered with his characteristic purposeful stride. At 55, he commanded the room simply by being present. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, and his silver hair was styled in a way that suggested both authority and approachability. He had built Pinnacle Industries from a small regional firm into a national powerhouse over the past 15 years. "Good morning, everyone," Sterling said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice. I have some important information to share that will affect how we move forward as a company." Sarah straightened in her chair, her earlier frustration temporarily forgotten as she focused on her CEO's words. Whatever was coming, she wanted to be prepared to respond appropriately. Sterling moved to the head of the table, but remained standing, his hands resting lightly on the back of his chair. "As many of you know, our industry is facing unprecedented changes. Client expectations are evolving. Technology is reshaping how we deliver services, and competition is intensifying from sources we never previously considered." He paused, his gaze moving slowly around the room, making eye contact with each executive in turn. When his eyes met Sarah's, she felt a moment of connection, as if he was speaking directly to her. In response to these challenges, Sterling continued, "I've been working with the board of directors to develop a new strategic initiative. We need fresh thinking, innovative approaches, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. We need leaders who aren't constrained by how things have always been done." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. This sounded like the kind of opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to contribute meaningfully to the company's future direction. "Over the next few months," Sterling said, "we'll be implementing a comprehensive transformation program. This will involve restructuring certain departments, launching new service offerings, and fundamentally changing how we approach client relationships." The room was completely silent now, every executive hanging on Sterling's words. Sarah could sense the mixture of anticipation and anxiety that filled the air. Change was always unsettling, especially for people who had found success within the existing structure. "To lead this transformation," Sterling continued, "I need someone who combines analytical rigor with creative thinking, someone who understands our current operations but isn't wedded to them, someone who can build consensus while also making tough decisions when necessary." Sarah's heart began to race. She had submitted several proposals over the past months that addressed exactly these kind of challenges. Her ideas about client onboarding, service delivery optimization, and technology integration had received positive feedback from Sterling's office, though she hadn't known he was considering them for such a significant initiative. Sterling's gaze swept the room once more before he spoke again. "I've given this decision considerable thought, and I'm confident that we have the right person for this challenge already in this room." The tension was palpable. Sarah could see her colleagues straightening in their chairs, each probably wondering if they were about to be selected for what was clearly a career-defining opportunity. She tried to manage her own expectations while simultaneously hoping that her contributions hadn't gone unnoticed. "The person I've chosen has demonstrated exceptional performance in their current role," Sterling said. "They've shown initiative delivered results and brought fresh perspectives to long-standing challenges. Most importantly, they've shown the ability to think beyond conventional approaches and imagine new possibilities for our company." Sarah's palms were sweating now. She gripped her pen tightly, trying to maintain her composure while her mind raced through the possibilities. This could be the moment that validated all her hard work and proved that her ideas had real value. "Therefore," Sterling announced, his voice clear and decisive, "I'm pleased to announce that Sarah Martinez will be leading our transformation initiative as our new Vice President of Strategic Development." The words hit Sarah like a physical force. For a moment, she couldn't quite process what she had heard. Vice President, Strategic Development, leadership of the entire transformation initiative. It was beyond anything she had dared to hope for. Around the table, the reaction was immediate and varied. Some executives smiled and nodded approvingly, while others looked surprised or concerned. Sarah caught a glimpse of Marcus's face, which had gone slightly pale, and David's expression of barely concealed shock. "Congratulations, Sarah," Sterling said, his smile warm and genuine. "I know you'll bring the vision and energy this initiative requires." Sarah managed to stand, her legs feeling somewhat unsteady. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I'm honored by your confidence, and I'm excited about the opportunity to contribute to the company's future." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt, and she was grateful for the years of practice at maintaining professional composure under pressure. Inside, her emotions were churning between elation, gratitude, and a fierce determination to prove that Sterling's faith in her was well-placed. As the meeting concluded and executives began filing out of the conference room, Sarah found herself surrounded by congratulatory handshakes and words of encouragement. But she couldn't help noticing that Marcus, David, and Lisa were among the first to leave, their congratulations brief and their expressions carefully neutral. Jennifer Walsh approached her with a smile that seemed genuine. "Congratulations, Sarah. This is quite an opportunity. I look forward to working with you on the marketing aspects of the transformation." "Thank you, Jennifer," Sarah replied. "I'm hoping we can collaborate closely. Your experience will be invaluable as we develop new approaches to client engagement." As the room emptied, Sterling approached Sarah personally. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that this decision was based solely on merit. Your proposals, your track record, and your potential for leadership. Don't let anyone suggest otherwise." Sarah looked at him in surprise, wondering if somehow he had overheard the morning's conversation or if he simply understood the challenges she faced as a young executive in a traditionally conservative industry. "I appreciate that, Mr. Sterling," she said. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he replied with a confident smile. "And Sarah, don't let anyone's preconceptions about age or experience limit your thinking. Sometimes the best solutions come from perspectives that aren't constrained by how things have always been done." As Sarah walked back to her office, her mind was already racing with ideas and plans for the transformation initiative. The morning's painful conversation seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by excitement and determination. She had been given an unprecedented opportunity to prove herself, and she intended to make the most of it. But as she settled into her chair and began outlining her first steps as VP of Strategic Development, Sarah couldn't quite shake the memory of Marcus's words about her age and qualifications. She knew that her new role would bring increased scrutiny and that proving herself would be more challenging than ever. What she didn't know was that the real surprises of the day were far from over, and that her age would indeed play a crucial role in what was about to unfold, just not in the way anyone expected. The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulatory emails, phone calls, and impromptu meetings. Sarah's assistant, Michelle, had barely had time to update her business cards before executives from other departments began reaching out to discuss their roles in the transformation initiative. The energy was infectious, and Sarah found herself energized by the prospect of implementing the innovative strategies she had been developing for months. By late afternoon, Sarah was reviewing preliminary budget projections when Michelle knocked on her office door. "Ms. Martinez, there's someone here to see you. He says it's personal and urgent." Sarah looked up from her computer screen, puzzled. She wasn't expecting anyone, and personal visits to the office were unusual. "Did he give you a name?" "Thomas Chun," Michelle replied. "He says he's from Chun and Associates legal firm. He seemed quite insistent about speaking with you today." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the mention of a law firm immediately put her on edge. She couldn't think of any reason a lawyer would want to speak with her, especially on the same day as her promotion. "Please send him in." Thomas Chun was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a well-tailored navy suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of important meetings. Despite his formal attire, there was something warm and grandfatherly about his demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending his hand as he entered her office. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I know this is unusual, but I have some information that I believe will be of great interest to you." Sarah shook his hand and gestured to the chairs in front of her desk. "Please have a seat. How can I help you, Mr. Chun?" Thomas settled into his chair and opened his briefcase, withdrawing a thick manila folder. "Ms. Martinez, I represent the estate of Elizabeth Hartford. I understand that name may not be familiar to you, but I believe you knew her by a different name." Sarah's brow furrowed. The name Hartford was completely unfamiliar, and she couldn't think of anyone in her life who might have used an alias. "I'm sorry, but I don't recognize that name. Perhaps there's been some confusion." "Ms. Martinez," Thomas said gently, "did you know your grandmother as Elizabeth Martinez?" Sarah's breath caught. Her grandmother had passed away when Sarah was just 8 years old, but she had vivid memories of the woman who had been such an important part of her early childhood. Elizabeth Martinez had been a quiet woman who lived modestly in a small house across town, working as a seamstress and volunteering at the local church. "Yes," Sarah said slowly, "but her name was Elizabeth Martinez, not Hartford. She was my father's mother." Thomas nodded knowingly. "That's where the story becomes interesting, Ms. Martinez. Your grandmother did indeed go by Elizabeth Martinez for the last 40 years of her life. But before that, she was Elizabeth Hartford. She was also one of the wealthiest women in this city." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. My grandmother lived very simply. She worked as a seamstress and lived in a tiny house. She was certainly not wealthy." "I understand your confusion," Thomas said sympathetically. "The story is quite remarkable, and it explains a great deal about the woman you remember. Elizabeth Hartford was the sole heir to Hartford Industries, which was one of the largest manufacturing companies in the region during the 1960s and 70s. He opened the folder and withdrew several documents and photographs. When she was 28 years old, just about your age now, Elizabeth made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She walked away from her inheritance, changed her name, and chose to live as an ordinary person." Sarah leaned forward, studying the black and white photographs Thomas had placed on her desk. One showed a young woman in an elegant evening gown, clearly at some sort of formal event. The woman looked remarkably like Sarah herself, with the same dark hair and determined expression. "Why would she do that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "According to the documents she left behind," Thomas explained, "she felt that inherited wealth had corrupted her family and isolated her from real human connections. She wanted to live authentically, to earn her own way, and to understand what life was like for ordinary people." Thomas withdrew another document from the folder. She also wanted to ensure that any future heirs would have the opportunity to prove themselves based on merit alone, without the burden or privilege of known wealth affecting their journey. Sarah's mind was reeling. The grandmother, she remembered, had indeed been different from other adults in her life. Elizabeth had always encouraged Sarah to think independently, to question conventional wisdom, and to trust her own judgment. She had also been remarkably wise about human nature, often offering insights that seemed to come from deep experience. "Ms. Martinez," Thomas continued, "your grandmother maintained her wealth throughout her life, but she lived off only what she earned through her own work. The inheritance remained untouched, invested, and growing over the decades. She left very specific instructions about when and how it should be passed on to her heir." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the water glass on her desk. "What kind of instructions?" "She wanted her heir to reach the age of 28 and to have achieved professional success through their own efforts, without any knowledge of the inheritance. She believed that by that age, a person's character would be sufficiently established that sudden wealth wouldn't fundamentally change who they were." Thomas smiled warmly. "According to the private investigator I hired to track your progress, today is significant for 2 reasons. Not only do you turn 29 next month, meeting the age requirement, but you are also promoted to vice president today, which certainly qualifies as professional success through your own merit. Sarah felt dizzy. How much are we talking about? The estate is currently valued at approximately $47 million, Thomas said matter-of-factly. This includes the original Hartford Industries holdings, which were sold and reinvested over the years, real estate investments, and substantial stock portfolios. Sarah stared at him in shock. $47 million. The number was so large, she couldn't quite process it. She had been worried about making her car payment next month, and now she was being told she was inheriting more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. There's more, Thomas continued. Your grandmother also left detailed instructions about how she hoped you would use this inheritance. She doesn't require you to follow her wishes, but she wanted you to understand her perspective. He withdrew a sealed envelope from the folder. This is a letter she wrote to you specifically to be opened only when you received your inheritance. She updated it periodically over the years as she learned about your life and accomplishments. With shaking hands, Sarah accepted the envelope. Her name was written on the front in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. Seeing that careful script brought back a flood of memories, bedtime stories, baking sessions in her tiny kitchen, and long walks where her grandmother would point out details about the world that others missed. There are also some legal documents you'll need to review and sign, Thomas said, but nothing urgent. Take your time to process this information. I know it's overwhelming. Sarah nodded numbly. Mr. Chun, can I ask how you knew about my promotion today? You said the timing was significant. Thomas smiled mysteriously. Your grandmother was very thorough in her planning. She arranged for a local contact to monitor your career progress and notify me when certain milestones were achieved. That contact reached out to me this morning. As Thomas packed up his briefcase and prepared to leave, he handed Sarah his business card. When you're ready to discuss the details, please call me. There are some interesting opportunities built into the inheritance that I think you'll find intriguing. After he left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring at the envelope containing her grandmother's letter. Outside her window, the city continued its normal rhythm, but Sarah felt as if her entire world had shifted on its axis. This morning, she had been concerned about the respect of her colleagues. Now she was grappling with the reality of inheriting more wealth than most people could imagine. She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Her grandmother's handwriting was as precise as she remembered, each letter carefully formed. My dear Sarah, the letter began. If you are reading this, then you have reached your 29th birthday and achieved the success I always knew you would. I am so proud of the woman you have become, and I regret that I could not be there to share in your accomplishments. I want you to know that choosing to live simply was the best decision I ever made. It allowed me to experience genuine relationships, to understand the value of honest work, and to appreciate the small joys that money cannot buy. I hope that my choice also gave you the gift of becoming the person you truly are, without the complications that inherited wealth can create. You have proven yourself capable, determined, and successful on your own merits. Now you have a choice to make about how you want to use the resources I am leaving you. I hope you will consider using this inheritance not just for your own benefit, but as a tool to create opportunities for others who are facing the same challenges you have faced. Remember what I always told you. True wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we contribute. Money is simply a tool, and like any tool, its value depends entirely on how it is used. I have watched you from afar through reports from my dear friend who works in your building. I know about your innovative ideas, your commitment to your work, and your frustration with people who judge you based on your age rather than your abilities. You are exactly the person I hoped you would become. Whatever you decide to do with this inheritance, do it with the same courage and integrity you have shown throughout your life. Trust your instincts, stay true to your values, and never let anyone convince you that you are less than extraordinary. With all my love and admiration, your grandmother, Elizabeth Hartford Martinez. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother had known about the challenges she faced at work the judgments about her age, the struggle to be taken seriously. Somehow, even from beyond the grave, Elizabeth had found a way to validate everything Sarah had experienced. The reference to "my dear friend who works in your building" made Sarah pause. Someone at Pinnacle Industries had been reporting on her progress to her grandmother's estate. She wondered who it could be and how long they had been watching her career develop. As she wiped her tears and composed herself, Sarah began to think about the implications of this inheritance. $47 million would change everything about her life, but it would also create new challenges. She thought about Marcus's comments from that morning about her age and qualifications. How would he and the others react when they learned about her inheritance? Would they assume that everything she had achieved was somehow tainted by hidden privilege? Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She needed time to think, to process what this meant for her future. But one thing was already clear. She was not going to let this inheritance define her any more than she had let other people's perceptions define her. She had earned her promotion through merit, and she intended to prove herself as VP of Strategic Development regardless of her newfound wealth. The inheritance would be a separate matter, something she would handle thoughtfully and deliberately. As she gathered her things to leave the office, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked the same as she had that morning, but everything had changed. The young woman who had started the day concerned about colleagues' whispered comments about her age was now one of the wealthiest people in the city. The irony was not lost on her. At 28, she had been both underestimated and secretly privileged in ways she never could have imagined. But as she walked toward the elevator, Sarah made a silent promise to her grandmother's memory. She would use this inheritance wisely, and she would never let anyone doubt that she had earned every opportunity through her own efforts and abilities. What Sarah didn't know was that the day's surprises were far from over, and that her new wealth was about to intersect with her professional life in ways that would test everything she thought she understood about trust, loyalty, and the true nature of the corporate world she had worked so hard to join. Sarah barely slept that night. She spent hours reading through the documents Thomas Chun had left with her, trying to comprehend the magnitude of her inheritance. Stock portfolios, real estate holdings, investment accounts. The paperwork painted a picture of wealth that felt completely disconnected from her reality. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her grandmother's face, the woman who had chosen simplicity over luxury and had somehow orchestrated this incredible gift decades in advance. She arrived at the office early the next morning, hoping to catch up on work before the usual bustle began. The transformation initiative required immediate attention, and Sarah was determined to prove that her promotion was justified regardless of her newfound personal circumstances. She had prepared a detailed timeline and resource allocation plan that she intended to present to Sterling by the end of the week. As she settled into her office with her first cup of coffee, Sarah noticed an unusual amount of activity in the hallway outside. Executives who normally didn't arrive until later were already in their offices, and there seemed to be an undercurrent of tension in the air. When Michelle arrived at 8:30, she looked uncharacteristically flustered. "Ms. Martinez," Michelle said, hovering in the doorway, "there's something odd happening this morning. People are asking strange questions about your background, your family, things like that." Sarah's stomach clenched. "What kind of questions?" "Marcus Chun from finance stopped by first thing this morning asking if you had ever mentioned inheriting money from family members. David Rodriguez wanted to know if you had expensive tastes or lived beyond what a regional manager's salary would support. It felt like they were investigating you for something." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with horrible clarity. Marcus Chun, Thomas Chun. She had been so focused on the emotional impact of learning about her grandmother that she hadn't made the obvious connection. Marcus wasn't just a colleague who had questioned her qualifications. He was related to the lawyer who had delivered her inheritance. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Michelle, did Marcus mention how he knew to ask these questions?" "He said he had heard some interesting information about your family history and wanted to verify it before the wrong rumors started circulating. Michelle replied, her expression concerned. Ms. Martinez, is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah forced herself to smile reassuringly. Everything's fine. If anyone else asks personal questions about me, please direct them to call me directly. I'll handle it. After Michelle left, Sarah immediately called Thomas Chen's office. The receptionist put her through to him within minutes. Mr. Chun, Sarah said without preamble, I need to ask you about something urgent. Do you have a relative named Marcus Chun who works in corporate finance? There was a long pause. Yes, Thomas replied carefully. Marcus is my nephew. Sarah, what has happened? He's been asking questions about my family background this morning. Personal financial questions. How much does he know about my inheritance? Thomas sighed heavily. I'm afraid this is my fault. Marcus called me last evening after he heard about your promotion. He was upset about your advancement and made some disparaging comments about your age and qualifications. I lost my temper and told him that you had more merit and class than he would ever possess and that he would learn exactly how wrong his assumptions were very soon. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling her grandmother's carefully orchestrated plan unraveling. Did you tell him specific details? Not exact amounts, but I implied that you had inherited substantial wealth from your grandmother. I also mentioned that she had been monitoring your career progress through someone in your company. Sarah, I am deeply sorry. I violated your privacy because I was angry at his disrespect. Sarah thanked him and hung up, her mind racing through the implications. Marcus now knew she was wealthy, and he was clearly spreading that information to other executives. But more concerning was Thomas's revelation that her grandmother had been receiving reports from someone inside Pinnacle Industries. Who had been watching her, and what did they know? Her phone rang, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. It was Sterling's assistant, requesting an immediate meeting in his office. Sarah's heart pounded as she gathered her materials for the Transformation Initiative presentation, hoping that was what he wanted to discuss. Sterling's office occupied the corner of the executive floor, with panoramic views of the city and furnishings that spoke of understated luxury. When Sarah entered, she was surprised to find Jennifer Walsh already seated across from Sterling's desk, her expression serious. Sarah, please sit down, Sterling said, his tone more formal than usual. Jennifer has brought some concerns to my attention that we need to discuss. Sarah took the remaining chair, her pulse quickening. What kind of concerns? Jennifer leaned forward slightly. Sarah, there are rumors circulating about your personal finances that are creating questions about your promotion to VP. Some executives are suggesting that your advancement was influenced by factors other than professional merit. What factors? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. The suggestion is that you may have had financial leverage or family connections that influenced the promotion decision, Sterling replied. Obviously, these are serious allegations that we need to address directly. Sarah felt a surge of anger. Less than 24 hours ago, these same people had been questioning her qualifications because of her age. Now they were questioning her integrity because they suspected she had money. She realized that no matter what her circumstances were, they would find reasons to doubt her worthiness. Mr. Sterling, Sarah said carefully, I can assure you that my promotion was earned through merit alone. I had no idea about any family wealth when you made that decision, and I have never used financial influence to advance my career. Can you explain how these rumors started? Jennifer asked. Marcus Chun is telling people that your family has significant financial resources that weren't disclosed during your employment background checks. Sarah took a deep breath. She could feel the careful privacy her grandmother had maintained for decades crumbling around her. Yesterday evening, I learned that I inherited money from my grandmother's estate. I was completely unaware of this inheritance until after my promotion was announced. The timing is purely coincidental. Sterling studied her face carefully. How significant is this inheritance? Significant enough to change my life, Sarah admitted. But it has nothing to do with my work or my qualifications for the VP position. Jennifer and Sterling exchanged glances. Sarah could see them trying to process this information and its implications for the company. Sarah, Sterling said finally, I believe you're telling the truth about the timing. But you need to understand the position this puts us in. Some board members are already expressing concerns about promoting someone so young to such a critical role. If they believe there were hidden factors influencing my decision, it could undermine the entire transformation initiative. Sarah felt her carefully built career starting to slip away. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to find a way to address these concerns before they spiral out of control, Sterling replied. The board is meeting this afternoon to discuss the transformation initiative budget. If these rumors reach them before we can provide clarification, it could jeopardize everything. Jennifer cleared her throat. There's another issue, Sarah. Marcus is claiming that your grandmother had a contact inside the company who was reporting on your progress. If that's true, it suggests a level of surveillance and potential influence that the board will find very concerning. Sarah's heart sank. Her grandmother's well-meaning monitoring was now being portrayed as corporate espionage. I don't know who that contact might have been. My grandmother never told me she was watching my career, and I never asked for any special attention or assistance. Sterling stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city skyline. Sarah, I want you to know that I stand behind my promotion decision. You earned that position, and I believe you're the right person to lead our transformation. But we need to get ahead of this situation before it damages your reputation and the company's confidence in our leadership. What do you suggest? Sarah asked. I think we need to be completely transparent, Jennifer said. Disclose the inheritance, explain the timing, and demonstrate that it had no bearing on your professional advancement. We should also investigate how your grandmother was receiving information about your career and ensure there are no ongoing conflicts of interest. Sarah nodded reluctantly. She had hoped to keep her inheritance private while she decided how to handle it, but that option was clearly no longer available. There's something else, Sterling added, turning back to face her. I need to ask you about Robert Hartford. Sarah's blood ran cold. Who? Robert Hartford. He's been a silent partner in Pinnacle Industries for the past 7 years. He owns 15% of the company through various investment vehicles. His relationship with the company is confidential, known only to the board and senior leadership. Sarah stared at him in shock. Hartford, that was my grandmother's maiden name. But I don't know any Robert Hartford. According to the information Marcus shared with Jennifer, your inheritance comes from the Hartford estate, Sterling continued. If Robert Hartford is connected to your grandmother's estate, then we have a serious conflict of interest situation. Sarah's mind raced back to her conversation with Thomas Chun. He had mentioned that her grandmother's fortune came from Hartford Industries, which had been sold and reinvested over the decades. It was entirely possible that some of those investments had included purchasing shares in other companies, including Pinnacle Industries. I need to call the estate attorney immediately, Sarah said, reaching for her phone. Wait, Sterling said, holding up his hand. Before we make any calls, we need to think through the implications. If your inheritance includes ownership stake in this company, then your promotion could be seen as self-dealing. The board would have no choice but to rescind your advancement and potentially terminate your employment. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Everything she had worked for was being threatened by the very inheritance that should have been a blessing. Her grandmother's attempt to provide for her future was instead endangering her present. There's also the question of who has been providing information about your career to the Hartford estate, Jennifer added. We need to identify that person and understand what information was shared and why. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made her stomach drop. We need to talk. Conference room C. Now, come alone. A friend of your grandmother. Sarah showed the message to Sterling and Jennifer, watching their expressions grow even more concerned. This is getting complicated quickly, Sterling said grimly. Sarah, I want you to know that I believe you've acted with complete integrity throughout your career. But we're dealing with perceptions and appearances now, not just facts. What happens if the board decides my promotion was compromised? Sarah asked. They could require your resignation, Jennifer replied honestly. Or they could demand a complete investigation that would drag out for months, and damage both your reputation and the company's credibility. Sarah stared at the text message on her phone. Someone in the building had been watching her for years, reporting to her grandmother, and now wanted to meet privately. The secret observer was about to reveal themselves, and Sarah had no idea whether they were friend or foe. "I think I need to take this meeting," she said finally. "Whoever this person is, they're the key to understanding how my grandmother was connected to Pinnacle Industries." Sterling nodded reluctantly. "Jennifer, and I will prepare a strategy for addressing the board's concerns. But, Sarah, be very careful. If this person has been operating covertly for years, we don't know what their motivations really are." As Sarah walked toward conference room C, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, her biggest concern had been earning the respect of colleagues who questioned her age. Now she was dealing with inheritance intrigue, potential conflicts of interest, and corporate espionage allegations. The conference room was empty when she arrived, but within minutes, the door opened to reveal the last person she would have expected, Robert Sterling himself. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "I think it's time we had a completely honest conversation." Sarah stared at Robert Sterling in complete bewilderment. The CEO of Pinnacle Industries was standing before her claiming to be the mysterious contact who had been reporting on her career to her grandmother's estate. The implications crashed over her like a wave. "You," she whispered. "You've been watching me for my grandmother?" Sterling moved to the conference table and sat down, gesturing for Sarah to join him. His usual commanding presence seemed softer now, more personal. "I've been a friend of your grandmother's for over 30 years, Sarah. Long before I became CEO of this company. Long before you even knew this company existed." Sarah sank into a chair across from him, her mind struggling to process this revelation. "I don't understand. How did you know my grandmother?" Sterling smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression seemed completely unguarded. "Elizabeth Hartford was my mentor when I was just starting my career. I was 25 years old, fresh out of business school, and completely overwhelmed by my first job at Hartford Industries. She was the heir to the company, but she was also the most down-to-earth, insightful person I had ever met." He paused, looking out the conference room window. "She taught me everything I know about leadership, about treating people with respect regardless of their position, about making decisions based on character rather than credentials. When she decided to walk away from Hartford Industries and live under a different name, she asked me to promise that I would look after her family if they ever needed help." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "She planned this. All of it." "Not exactly," Sterling replied. "Elizabeth had no way of knowing that you would end up working for a company I would eventually run. That was pure coincidence. But when you applied for your first position at Pinnacle Industries 6 years ago, I recognized your name immediately." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph, placing it on the table between them. It showed a much younger Sterling standing next to a woman who looked exactly like Sarah, both of them smiling in front of what appeared to be an office building. "That's your grandmother at 28, Sterling explained. "The resemblance is remarkable, but it goes beyond physical appearance. Elizabeth had the same determination, the same innovative thinking, the same courage to challenge conventional approaches that I see in you." Sarah picked up the photograph, studying her grandmother's face. "So you've been monitoring my career from the beginning?" "Monitoring is too strong a word," Sterling said. "I made sure you were given fair opportunities to succeed or fail based on your own merits. I never intervened on your behalf, never gave you advantages that weren't available to other employees. But I did keep your grandmother informed about your progress because I knew how much she cared about your future. And she never told me," Sarah said, more to herself than to Sterling. "She wanted you to succeed on your own terms, without any knowledge of her wealth or connections that might influence your decisions. Elizabeth believed that character was forged through genuine challenge, not manufactured ease." Sterling leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something crucial. Your promotion yesterday was based entirely on merit. I recommended you for that position because you're the best person for the job, not because of any connection to your grandmother. In fact, I specifically avoided letting my personal knowledge of your family influence my professional judgment. Sarah looked up from the photograph. But you chose to promote me on the same day I inherited her estate. That can't be a coincidence. It wasn't, Sterling admitted. Elizabeth had asked me to watch for signs that you had achieved significant professional success. When I decided to create the VP position and offer it to you, I contacted Thomas Chun to let him know that the inheritance conditions had been met. The timing was coordinated, but the promotion decision was independent of the inheritance. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued confusion. Mr. Sterling, there's something else. The Hartford estate, does it include ownership in Pinnacle Industries? Sterling's expression grew more complex. Yes, it does. And that's where this situation becomes more complicated. He stood and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the conference room, picking up a marker. Let me explain the corporate structure that your grandmother created over the past 30 years. Sterling began drawing a diagram showing various investment entities and their connections. After Elizabeth left Hartford Industries, she didn't just disappear. She spent decades building a diverse investment portfolio, including shares in dozens of companies across multiple industries. Pinnacle Industries is one of those investments. Sarah studied the diagram. How much of the company does the estate own? 15%, Sterling replied. It's held through a series of shell companies and investment trusts to maintain anonymity, but it makes the Hartford estate one of our largest shareholders. The implications hit Sarah immediately. So when I inherit the estate, I become a major shareholder in the company where I work. Exactly. And that creates a conflict of interest that the board will have to address. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. What does this mean for my promotion? Sterling returned to his seat. That depends on how we handle the situation. There are several options, none of them simple. He began counting on his fingers. First, you could decline the inheritance and maintain your position. Second, you could accept the inheritance and resign from the company. Third, you could accept the inheritance and recuse yourself from any decisions that might benefit shareholders, though that would severely limit your effectiveness as VP. Fourth, we could arrange for the Hartford shares to be sold or transferred to avoid the conflict. Sarah stared at the diagram on the whiteboard. Her grandmother had spent decades building this financial empire, and now Sarah was being asked to dismantle it to preserve her career. There's a fifth option, Sterling continued, but it would require complete transparency with the board and might result in significant changes to how the company operates. What kind of changes? Your grandmother's investment philosophy was based on long-term sustainability rather than short-term profits. The Hartford investment entities have been pushing for progressive employment policies, environmental responsibility, and ethical business practices. If you inherit those shares and take an active role as a shareholder, you could influence company policy in ways that align with Elizabeth's values. Sarah felt a stirring of excitement despite the complexity of the situation. You mean I could actually make the changes I've been proposing, not just as an employee, but as an owner? Precisely. But it would mean acknowledging your inheritance publicly and dealing with all the assumptions and judgments that would follow. Before Sarah could respond, Sterling's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, his expression growing concerned. Sarah, we have a more immediate problem. Marcus Chun has called an emergency meeting with the board for this afternoon. He's claiming that your promotion represents corporate fraud and demanding a full investigation. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of investigation? He's alleging that I promoted you knowing about your family's financial stake in the company, and that the promotion was designed to benefit Hartford estate interests rather than Pinnacle Industries. He's also suggesting that your grandmother's monitoring of your career constitutes corporate espionage. Sterling stood abruptly. We need to get ahead of this before the board meeting. I'm going to recommend that we call an immediate meeting with full disclosure of all facts. What should I do? First, call Thomas Chun and get complete documentation of the Hartford estate holdings. Second, prepare a statement explaining your lack of knowledge about the inheritance prior to yesterday. Third, decide whether you're willing to accept the inheritance and its implications or whether you want to walk away from it. As Sterling moved toward the door, Sarah called after him. "Mr. Sterling, why did my grandmother really choose to give up her wealth and live simply?" He paused, his hand on the door handle. "She told me once that money reveals character rather than creating it. She wanted to know who she really was when stripped of financial privilege. And she wanted to ensure that anyone who inherited her fortune would have proven their character before wealth could potentially corrupt it." Sterling's expression softened. "Sarah, your grandmother would be incredibly proud of the person you become. Don't let fear of other people's judgments prevent you from honoring her legacy." After Sterling left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room, staring at the photograph of her grandmother. The young woman in the picture looked confident and determined, but Sarah wondered what fears and doubts she had hidden behind that smile when she made the decision to walk away from everything she had known. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Thomas Chun. "Sarah, I've been expecting your call. I assume Robert has explained the situation." "Some of it," Sarah replied. "Mr. Chun, I need to understand exactly what I'm inheriting and what obligations come with it. The Hartford estate includes not just financial assets, but also a legacy of social responsibility. Your grandmother spent decades using her wealth to support causes she believed in, always quietly and without public recognition. The shareholdings in various companies weren't just investments. They were tools for encouraging ethical business practices." Thomas paused. "Sarah, there's something else you should know. Your grandmother left specific instructions about what should happen if inheriting her wealth ever threatened your career or personal integrity." "What instructions?" "She established a provision that allows you to transfer the entire inheritance to a charitable trust while maintaining enough personal assets to ensure your financial security. If you choose that option, you would inherit approximately $5 million for your personal use, and the remaining $42 million will be managed by trustees to continue your grandmother's philanthropic work." Sarah felt a sense of relief, mixed with continued uncertainty. "And what about the Pinnacle Industries shares?" "Those would be included in the charitable trust, eliminating any conflict of interest while still allowing the Hartford legacy to influence corporate social responsibility through shareholder advocacy." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that her grandmother had anticipated even this complication. Elizabeth Hartford had created multiple pathways forward, ensuring that Sarah would have choices regardless of what circumstances arose. But now Sarah faced the most important decision of her life. She could take the safe route, transferring most of the inheritance to charity and maintaining her career trajectory without complications. Or she could embrace the full inheritance and use it to create the kind of changes she had always believed the business world needed. Either way, she would have to face the board meeting that afternoon and defend both her integrity and her right to choose her own future. As Sarah gathered her materials to leave the conference room, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked exactly like her grandmother in that old photograph, young, determined, and standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. The question was, would she choose the safe path or the courageous one? The boardroom at Pinnacle Industries had never felt more intimidating. Sarah sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table, facing 12 board members whose expressions ranged from curious to openly skeptical. Marcus Chun sat near the middle, a stack of documents in front of him and a look of smug satisfaction on his face. Jennifer Walsh offered Sarah an encouraging nod, while Robert Sterling maintained the neutral demeanor required of his position as CEO. Board Chairman William Morrison, a distinguished man in his 70s, called the meeting to order at exactly 3 o'clock. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to address serious allegations regarding the recent promotion of Sarah Martinez to Vice President of Strategic Development. Mr. Chin has raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest and improper influence in the promotion process." Morrison's gaze settled on Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, you'll have the opportunity to respond to these allegations, but first, Mr. Chun will present his findings. Marcus stood, his confidence evident as he began distributing copies of his research. Members of the board, what I've discovered represents a serious breach of corporate governance and ethical standards. He clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the wall screen. Yesterday, Ms. Martinez was promoted to VP based on what we were told was merit alone. However, I have evidence that she inherited substantial wealth from an estate that owns 15% of this company, creating an undisclosed conflict of interest. Marcus clicked to the next slide, which showed a corporate ownership diagram. The Hartford estate, which Ms. Martinez inherited, has been secretly influencing company policy through its shareholding position for years. More disturbing, CEO Robert Sterling has admitted to monitoring Ms. Martinez's career on behalf of this estate. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah could see the concern in their faces as Marcus painted a picture of corporate conspiracy and hidden influence. Furthermore, Marcus continued, this inheritance was timed to coincide with Ms. Martinez's promotion, suggesting a coordinated effort to place someone with substantial financial interest in a position where they could influence company decisions for their own benefit. Marcus clicked to his final slide, which showed financial projections. I recommend that we immediately rescind Ms. Martinez's promotion, conduct a full investigation into CEO Sterling's relationship with the Hartford estate, and consider legal action to protect shareholders from this apparent fraud. The room fell silent as Marcus returned to his seat. Sarah could feel the weight of 12 pairs of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such damning allegations. Chairman Morrison nodded to Sarah. Ms. Martinez, you may now present your response. Sarah stood slowly, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She had spent the previous 2 hours preparing for this moment, but she knew that her next words would determine not just her career, but her entire future. Chairman Morrison, board members, thank you for the opportunity to address these concerns directly. Mr. Chin's presentation contains factual errors and misleading conclusions that I need to correct. Sarah moved to the presentation screen, clicking to her own prepared slides. First, let's establish the timeline. I was offered the VP position on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. I learned about my inheritance on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. Mr. Chin's allegation that these events were coordinated is factually incorrect. She clicked to the next slide, which showed her employment record. Second, my promotion was based on 6 years of documented performance at this company, 3 previous promotions earned through merit, and specific proposals I submitted for the transformation initiative. Every element of my qualification for this position predates any knowledge of the inheritance. Sarah looked directly at Marcus as she continued. Third, Mr. Chin's characterization of the Hartford estate's involvement in company policy as secret influence misrepresents standard shareholder activity. The Hartford investments have been properly disclosed to relevant parties and have focused on encouraging long-term sustainability and ethical practices. She clicked to her next slide. Now, let me address the real questions this situation raises. The slide showed a simple chart titled Choices Moving Forward. Sarah had decided during her preparation that complete transparency was her only viable strategy. I stand before you today facing a decision that will define not just my career, but my character. I can choose the safe path, decline the inheritance, maintain my position, and continue building my career without complications. Or I can choose the path that honors my grandmother's legacy and potentially benefits this company and its stakeholders in ways that go beyond short-term profits. Sarah paused, making eye contact with each board member. But before I reveal my decision, I want you to understand who my grandmother was and why her story matters to all of us. She clicked to a photograph of Elizabeth Hartford as a young woman. This is Elizabeth Hartford at 28 years old. She was heir to one of the largest companies in this region, with wealth and privilege that most people can only imagine. And she chose to give it all up. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. She didn't give it up out of guilt or shame. She gave it up because she wanted to know who she truly was when stripped of inherited privilege. She wanted to earn her place in the world through her own efforts and abilities. The next slide showed Elizabeth's modest house and seamstress shop. For 40 years, my grandmother lived as Elizabeth Martinez, working as a seamstress and volunteering at local charities. She raised a family, contributed to her community, and built genuine relationships based on who she was, not what she owned. Sarah clicked to the final slide, which showed the inheritance documents. But she never forgot the responsibility that comes with wealth. She spent those decades carefully investing and growing her estate, not for personal luxury, but as a tool for positive change. Sarah turned away from the screen to face the board directly. My grandmother created the inheritance structure not to benefit me personally, but to ensure that whoever inherited her wealth would have proven their character and capabilities before money could potentially corrupt their judgment. She took a deep breath. Today, I choose to honor that legacy. Sarah walked back to her position at the table, her voice clear and confident. I am accepting my inheritance in full, including the shareholding position in Pinnacle Industries. But I'm also accepting the responsibility that comes with it. The board members leaned forward, clearly not expecting this declaration. I propose that we use this situation not as a source of conflict, but as an opportunity, Sarah continued. The Hartford Estates investment philosophy aligns with the transformation initiative I was hired to lead. We can use this alignment to accelerate positive changes that benefit all stakeholders, employees, customers, communities, and shareholders alike. Chairman Morrison spoke first. Ms. Martinez, you're proposing to maintain both your executive position and your shareholding position? That creates an inherent conflict of interest. Yes, it does, Sarah agreed. And I propose we address that conflict through complete transparency and additional oversight. Sarah pulled out a document she had prepared with Thomas Chen's help. I am proposing the creation of an ethics oversight committee that will review any decisions where my dual role might create conflicts. I am also proposing that all Hartford Estate voting on shareholder matters be conducted through an independent trustee to ensure company decisions aren't influenced by my executive position. Board member Patricia Williams raised her hand. Ms. Martinez, this is highly unusual. Why not simply choose one role or the other? Sarah smiled, thinking of her grandmother's letter. Because my grandmother didn't choose the easy path when she was my age, and she taught me that sometimes the most important changes require the courage to challenge conventional approaches. She looked around the room. We can continue operating as we always have, making decisions based on short-term financial returns and traditional corporate hierarchies. Or we can embrace a model that values long-term sustainability, employee development, and social responsibility alongside profitability. Marcus spoke up, his voice sharp with frustration. This is exactly what I was warning about. Ms. Martinez is using her inheritance to force her agenda on this company. Sarah turned to face him directly. Mr. Chun, yesterday morning you and your colleagues questioned my qualifications because I was too young. This afternoon you're questioning my integrity because I'm too wealthy. The common thread isn't my age or my money. It's your assumption that I don't deserve the opportunities I've earned. The room went completely silent. Sarah could see some board members nodding slightly, while others looked uncomfortable with the direct confrontation. I've spent 6 years proving myself at this company, Sarah continued. I have earned every promotion, delivered on every commitment, and contributed innovative ideas that have improved our operations and client satisfaction. My inheritance doesn't change any of that history. Chairman Morrison called for a brief recess. When the board reconvened, he announced their decision. Ms. Martinez, the board has voted to accept your proposal with conditions. You may maintain your VP position and your inheritance subject to the ethics oversight structure you proposed. However, you will be required to report quarterly to the board on any potential conflicts and their resolution. Sarah felt a wave of relief mixed with determination. Thank you for your confidence. I won't let you down. As the board members filed out, Sterling approached Sarah with a smile that reminded her of her grandmother's warmth. "Elizabeth will be proud of you. You chose the harder path, just like she did." "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, "I want you to know that I understand the risks I'm taking. This arrangement might not work. I might fail as VP, or the ethics oversight might prove too restrictive, or the other executives might never fully accept my dual role." "That's possible," Sterling agreed. "But you know what's guaranteed? If you had chosen the safe path, you would always wonder what you might have accomplished if you had been brave enough to try." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same conference room where she had first learned about her inheritance. But everything had changed. The transformation initiative was ahead of schedule and under budget. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. 3 competitors had reached out about adopting similar ethics oversight structures. Marcus Chun had requested a transfer to another division, claiming he wasn't comfortable working under someone so young. His departure had actually improved team dynamics, as other team members felt more comfortable contributing innovative ideas without fear of judgment based on age or experience. The Hartford Estates Charitable Trust, which Sarah had established for the majority of her inheritance, was funding scholarship programs for young professionals and supporting small businesses owned by women and minorities. Sarah had kept enough personal assets to ensure her financial security, but her focus remained on using wealth as a tool for positive change rather than personal luxury. As Sarah reviewed the quarterly report she would present to the board the following week, she reflected on her grandmother's wisdom. Elizabeth Hartford had understood that true power wasn't about controlling wealth. It was about having the courage to use whatever resources you possess to create opportunities for others. The morning's gossip session seemed like a lifetime ago, but Sarah remembered Marcus's comment about her age with perfect clarity. He had suggested that someone who was barely out of college for 5 years couldn't possibly understand long-term implications. Sarah smiled as she thought about her response if someone made that comment today. She would tell them that her grandmother had proven that age was just a number. What mattered was character, courage, and the willingness to challenge assumptions about how things should be done. At 28, Elizabeth Hartford had walked away from inherited privilege to discover who she truly was. At 28, Sarah Martinez had inherited that same privilege and chosen to use it as a tool for positive change. The numbers were the same, but the paths were different, and that made all the difference in the world. As Sarah prepared to leave the office, she stopped at the coffee station where she had overheard that painful conversation months earlier. The space looked the same, but the conversations she heard now were different. Instead of whispered comments about age and qualifications, she heard excited discussions about the new mentorship program, the employee development initiatives, and the innovative client service approaches that were setting industry standards. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and walked to her office window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out, there were other young professionals facing the same challenges she had faced, being underestimated because of their age, struggling to prove their worth in environments that valued experience over innovation. Through the Hartford Charitable Trust, Sarah was working to create opportunities for those individuals, just as her grandmother had created opportunities for her. The cycle of positive change would continue, one courageous decision at a time. As she gathered her things to go home, Sarah's assistant Michelle knocked on her door. "Ms. Martinez, there's a young woman here asking for career advice. She says she heard about your story and wanted to know if you had any guidance for someone starting out in corporate America." Sarah smiled, thinking of her grandmother's letter. True wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we contribute. "Send her in," Sarah said. "I'd be happy to share what I've learned." The young woman who entered her office looked nervous but determined, reminding Sarah of herself just a few months earlier. As Sarah began sharing her story, she realized that this was exactly what her grandmother had hoped for. Not just the transfer of wealth, but the transfer of wisdom, courage, and the belief that age should never be a barrier to making a positive difference in the world. The jokes about her age had indeed changed everything, just not in the way anyone had expected.